ended up being by chance, yung dalawang parang co-facilitators or co-coordinators. And I'll just briefly, before we go to our tips and what we learned, I'll just briefly give a background of my experience with crowdsourcing and coordination, and then I'll turn it over to Carla, who can talk about her experience and how this applies to, what we're doing now, and then we'll share our 5 tips. So, that's the only slide that we really prepared for today. So when I think of crowdsourcing, the first thing that comes to my mind is really just like, asking, people online, like, what's the best place to get good, something, or what's the best place to eat? That's the very basic idea of crowdsourcing. But my first real exposure to what crowdsourcing could be potentially was when I was still working in Rappler. I was in charge of our civic engagement arm, and that was the time right after, or right before actually Typhoon Yolanda. And even then, because of the numerous typhoons, one of the things that we learned quickly was that social media was such a great venue for getting information, or at least sharing information. And of course, even then, disinformation. This is around 2012, 2013. But one thing was missing was that the government at that time, Office of Civil Defense, wasn't really paying attention to what was on social media. And so, my realization there was that crowdsourcing without any action, without any larger goal, is really just people speaking on the top of their lungs and not really doing anything. So there needs to be crowdsourcing and coordination, or actual response and action to make it effective and powerful. So we worked with the government at that time, Office of Civil Defense, to basically orient them about social media, because it was still a nascent point of a channel for communication. Tapos, aside from just letting them know that may nagreklamo or may nagpa-publish ng information on social media, to actually get them to use the social media to communicate and to show that the government was listening and responding. And it became another venue now for mapping, which many people started doing, mapping, sharing databases, trying to bridge volunteer efforts during a typhoon or any natural disaster like an earthquake. And so that I think quickly became the norm, that people realized the power of social media. But honestly, like, when I think about that experience, still nothing could have prepared us for COVID-19, and just the mass of information, especially now nasanay na tayo sa social media, just the mass of information na umiikot sa chat groups natin, sa Facebook, on Twitter, and every kind of social media platform, even TikTok, I dare say, although hindi ako user. And so that experience with the typhoon response helped in a way, but still did not help us think about how to effectively, crowdsource and communicate information. And it came to a point when everyone was just sharing ideas and forwarding different, links on social media. And I think at one point, one of the government officials, the USEC, Carl, who we regularly work with in our previous role in tax reform, he's with the Department of Finance, just said, why not civil society come together, organize yourselves, and sort of mirror government, so that number one, it's more coordinated, but also that there's clear voices and recommendations that are being articulated, instead of everyone shouting in everyone else's ear. And so that's how the COVID-19 Action Network came about. That the idea was that if we can coordinate our different actions and everyone will have different initiatives, we'll work better at getting to a point where we can come up with actual recommendations for government, but also just coordinate our different actions to come up with clear solutions that we can work and do on our own. So that in a nutshell is the COVID-19 Action Network Philippines. Before we go on and tell you what we learned, I'll pass it on to Carla to talk about her own professional experiences and how it prepared her for this work.
Thanks, Zach. So my work is mainly with Action for Economic Reforms, and it deals with, we've done a lot of legislative advocacy work in the past few years. So namely, I mentioned kanina ni Elmer, we did work on tax reform, on sin tax and freedom of information. And a lot of this work deals with having to engage with various sectors So we have civil society. We also have network with medical professionals and doctors, and with government and with legislators and other various stakeholders. And I think when we started out, and the work really mainly deals with how do we interface our initiatives with these various groups with different interests, right? So usually we have a shared objective, which is to pass legislation to get our advocacy to uh, to basically yeah, enact a law. So that was our common objective before. So I think when the COVID-19 issue began, as mentioned by Zach, there are a lot of people with varying levels of expertise. Parang all of them wanted to do something to respond to the issue. It's just that the difficulty was there were too many channels for people to actually voice out their recommendations and concerns, but it was very difficult to streamline those recommendations into actionable solutions and getting them on the table of decision makers who can actually do something about them. So I think that was the part where what we try to facilitate in COVID Action Network, to get the right mix of people together to talk about the issues that they've seen on the ground, and basically come up with actionable solutions, and then get them in touch with the proper channels as well, who can make actions or make decisions on these recommendations. So there, I think that's what I have to add to what you said, Zach.
Okay, thanks, Carla. I think just to also mention that before we share a screen, that part of also why we're doing this is because we want, and also what I've learned, I think, when it comes to disaster response is, there needs to be, like what Eleanor was saying, there seems to be a crisis. No, definitely there's a crisis, but it's not just a crisis in the sense of a public health crisis. There's also a crisis of leadership. And one thing we want to change is that, there can be leaders, but it doesn't necessarily have to be one leader. It can be many of us taking the lead on different initiatives, but working together and coordinating in some fashion, not necessarily in a very rigid or structural fashion, like in the military, for example, but in alternative forms. And that's where the power of, I think, civil organizations, non-government organizations in the private sector including the academe, are really, equipped to do, because everyone has their own specialties or expertise, sabi ni Carla. But why can't we combine these expertise and collaborate in a way that's open and that's, that again addresses this very unusual, very unprecedented crisis? And so we've tried to come up with, let me just share my screen again. We've tried to come up with at least some key tips that we've learned in this coordination work. Again, this is by no means definitive, but it will help us at least start a discussion.
One should have been stopped using Viber.
yeah. So actually, yung major learning namin is Viber is really messy. But we tried to do is try to bridge nga. Actually, sorry, just a side note. It's messy, pero yun yung preferred mode of communication among a very good number of people, especially maybe the non-millennials in this audience. So what we've tried to piece together is just 5 lessons that we've learned in smart crowdsourcing, and I'll do the first 2. So first one is, like, even if we don't say it explicitly, it's always good to establish what the values of, what we're doing together are. And for us, I think, Carla and I have worked together a very long time, so we really know that these are our values. But it's basically being open, being inclusive, and collaborative, because we wouldn't be able to do this kind of cross-functional, cross-expertise work if no one was trying to be collaborative at all in the first place. And there was a time when I remember a person who had been in the DRR field for a very long time but had recently left because of a change in a local mayor. He was with the previous mayor, aligned with the previous mayor, and then the previous mayor was voted out, so wala na siya dun. He came into the community or to the Slack workspace, and the first question he asked was, is this a political group? Is there any politics here? And Carla was the first to respond and said, no politics here. We're just here to collaborate. And I think that set the tone, because then he knew he was in a safe space. And so that leads also to the second point that we learned. When we think about crowdsourcing and collaboration, we need to manage expectations quickly at the onset, meaning that, you know, people can come in with their different expectations. Some have very high expectations for what the work will include or what the collaboration will include, and some people might not have any expectations whatsoever, and that's fine. But being able to manage what we, at the very least, can expect from each other, meaning, again, being open, collaborative, trying to, you know, participate in any which way, opens up the space to build on that, instead of having such higher expectations in the beginning, or no expectation setting in the beginning, and then people are like either disappointed that, you know, I didn't, this doesn't meet what I intended to come here for. It doesn't address what I want to address. So being able to manage expectations, asking, for example, each one who comes in, so what would you like to do? How would you like to help? Or what can you contribute? Is usually one of the first questions that we always ask whenever we try to invite others on board. And that also leaves room for greater possibility, especially if you can at least come with a baseline of expectations, but say, hey, this isn't the only, you know, thing that you can do. There's more, actually. So explore. We tell people sometimes, you know, feel free to lurk around, meaning just observe what other people are doing, and then find out where you want to fit in and collaborate on. And that's not usual, diba? That's something that we don't normally usually do when it comes to a crisis mode. There's no time for us to figure things out. But in this case, because there's nothing else that we can do, we need to figure it out. We need to work together and collaborate openly. Carla, you want to take the 3 to 5?
Yeah, sure. So I think, okay, I thought my mic was on. So coming from a coalition perspective, no, parang your coalition has more legitimacy the broader, the bigger, the more diverse it is, right? So I think there's incentive to kind of pull together different people from various backgrounds with different political ideologies, with differing expertise. And of course, at first that may be challenging kasi nga, you come from different perspectives. But I think it's important to highlight from the onset to focus on our shared objectives rather than those differences, because that's where you get people all on the same page. Parang despite what you think about this administration, for example, or despite what you think about this particular policy recommendation, I think what we can agree upon is that we want to resolve this issue, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think once you start from there, it becomes a lot clearer how to move forward despite our differences. And I think that's a perspective that we should instill in when we do crowdsourcing, when we collaborate with other people, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to expand our network. Otherwise, if we focus on just talking to people with who are like-minded, who have the same ideas, who have the same opinions and things, then we're going to end up having our own echo chamber, and it's not going to be as impactful as you want it to be. It's not going to be able to be as cross-cutting, or you're not going to be able to reach as many people as you want to. So there, that's number 3. And then number 4, it's important for us to take time to learn the strengths and weaknesses of our collaborators, because I think if you're the one facilitating the collaboration, if you know which areas of expertise this person has or this group has, and where they may be lacking, then you're at a better position to sort of facilitate connections, or how to bridge the gap between two groups or two individuals who may be able to help each other, but would have otherwise not talked to each other because they don't really know one another. So that's what we actually do in the network. So when we find groups that are already doing similar initiatives, we connect them with each other. We tell them, hey, you guys are doing the same thing. Perhaps you might want to talk to each other and figure out a more efficient or effective way of doing it. Or if we feel like this person has something to contribute to the project or initiative of this other group, then we introduce that person to that group. So I think you'll be able to. The only way you're gonna be able to do that is you really take time to get to know each and every person or each and every group, and sort of like get an idea what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and how you can help can help bridge the gap. And on that note, I think number 5 is connected, is to actively look out for opportunities to collaborate, amplify, or streamline initiatives. So it has to be very deliberate on the part of the person, or on the leaders trying to facilitate the collaboration. That the reason why you're pulling people together is not just to get a lot of people in your network, right? It's really how do we sort of make the processes, or make our initiatives more meaningful. So it has to be purposive in that sense. So that's me, Zach and I, we would actively like search for opportunities within the network, like how do we best deliver the solution, or how do we best resolve this problem given the people in our network. And if we find that there are people outside of our network that might be helpful to the current initiatives that the people within the network are doing, that's when we actively approach those groups as well to become part of the network. And usually people are, especially I guess in the circumstances that we're in, there's more openness and there's more willingness on the part of people to collaborate, to volunteer, to sort of to conduct this initiative, even on a voluntary basis, even without any compensation at all, because we're in a crisis mode. So I think that's also an important thing to keep in mind, that we have to be able to take this opportunity of being, it sounds bad, being in a crisis, but to expedite the sort of reforms that we want to see happen, because this is not a usual circumstance that we're in. And this is a good opportunity to actually implement radical changes if we have, if learn to collaborate with the people who can make those things happen.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's okay, Carla. And to give an example, I think we just had a meeting this morning with a group called Move Manila, and they are a group that apparently has been advocating for transportation mobility reforms in Metro Manila for quite some time, even before COVID-19 happened. But now that COVID-19 has kind of changed everything, this group has found itself at the forefront of what potentially could be great reforms if their recommendations are carried out for the transportation sector and for mobility in general. So when we learned about this group, or we learned that individuals were part of this group, we invited them in. And what happened was that they learned about what other people were doing. They found other collaborators as well. And now that they know that there's this venue where they can articulate their recommendations, we were talking with them earlier this morning. We asked them, so what's next? After you do these recommendations, how are you going to get the government, the IATF, for example, to listen? And their usual tact, of course, like anyone that has recommendations, is you send it out to your friends and networks, and hopefully it will land on the desk of someone who's going to make the policy. But now that there's this larger network that they're a part of, now that they know that they can reach out to other people who might not be dealing with mobility issues, but might be dealing with public health issues or the economy, there's a larger network to also share that information to, and to cross-pollinate ideas. So it's like a virtual co-working space, kumbaga, na everyone is building off of each other's work, and at the same time, together, we can amplify that those recommendations is coming from, sabi ni Carla, it's coming from much more solid ground, and ideally with much more force and impact. So that's just an example of how this is playing out. And we're seeing that not just with mobility, but also with technical solutions. We're seeing that with health, local government units thinking about how to care for COVID-19 patients in the community.
Actually,
point, yeah, go, Carla.
If we can share that on the tech solutions, no, I think we were able to facilitate a very good collaboration with various groups actually who have developed tech platforms to address healthcare systems issues within, well, not just within DOH, but basically the healthcare system in Metro Manila. So they developed platforms, they developed a website, and we noticed that there are a lot of other groups with similar initiatives. And it was kind of, we were bothered because ayun, they were doing the exact same thing, but they weren't talking to each other. So we actually got these people, we actively sought out these people and like got them to talk to each other. And we got them to talk with DOH and a member of the IATF. And basically, talk about what are the existing initiatives, what are the things that the government is already doing, and what else can these groups who have volunteered their talents and efforts to create this website actually do to supplement that so that we don't duplicate the same thing. And as of now, ayun, these groups, DOH, these tech developers, and a group in the University of the Philippines Research, EPRI, are collaborating on developing a platform for sort of a hospital triage system where people can actively look for the availability in hospitals, the available beds in hospitals or available ICUs in hospitals, so that they can immediately be catered to. So I think those collaborations are really impactful in the sense that if they weren't able to talk to each other, then they would have gone on developing separate platforms. And basically there's not going to be much added value, right? Instead of like talking about what are the missing gaps and how can they help supplement those gaps by doing these initiatives. So
yeah. Carla, you want to talk about how we work on Slack?
Oh yeah. So as we mentioned, one of our primary hurdles in the beginning of starting this network was to get all the old people off of Viber because there's a preference. I mean, of course, Viber is very easy to use, but the limitation is that you can't have that many people talking about various topics at the same time. It's going to be tedious because you're going to have to wade through the sea of messages in Viber or the sea of Viber groups that you have. So what we did was we tried to, and I think we were successful naman, Zach, no, to migrate most of the conversations that dealt with COVID-19 response into a workspace called Slack. So in Slack, the difference is you can have everybody there. You can have hundreds and hundreds of participants all on the same platform, but you can have separate channels to discuss the different issues, and people can tune in those different channels. They can choose to participate, or they can tune out of it, like if they don't think it's relevant to them, so they don't need to participate in those conversations. So that way, we're able to streamline the discussions, and basically, we know who the point persons are, what are their initiatives, and which areas do they want to contribute to because of this. Yeah.
And Jerry says, "Can I join your Slack?" Yes, we will send you the.
Of course.
We will send you the invite. In fact, I think we have about more than 150 people now on that Slack.
Yeah.
Channel, I think, yeah. So that's just one of the ways we are opening, collaboration. The other thing that
176.
176. So that's ilang Viber messages that have been saved from being sent.
Yeah.
The other thing that we want to share is also that, so after what we learned also is that there needs to be a way to communicate even with everyone doing their own thing. Because we don't expect naman that we're the only ones doing this now, this kind of communication work. But there needs to be a way to communicate out internally and outwardly as well of what's happening within the network, but outside as well. And so we came up with this daily brief, which is basically a newsletter that wraps everyone's work. So if someone is working on a particular thing, or we know about somebody else outside of the network working on something, we'll include it in the daily brief, as well as updates, latest news from the day, prior. So it comes out every morning, Mondays to Fridays. And it's a way for us to all align and tune in, especially if there are policy recommendations, statements, clear actions that the members of the network need to do and actively or collectively work on. So that's a way of us to align and to kind of celebrate the good news, celebrate the win. So we're tracking our progress. We're creating that narrative that there is progress being made, ideally, from both within government, but also outside of government, the civil society and others involved. And
We
yeah,
have a
that's all the ways we have taken.
question.
Yeah, sure.
We have a question from Bram Stoffel.
Okay,
Have you gotten any
Carla.
pushback? Yeah.
Yeah, let's transition first. Let's spend around 10 minutes in the breakout session so that everyone can
All right.
start mingling with each other and increasing the connectivity of this group. So we will be putting you in small groups for 10 minutes, and then in the chat you have the guide question. So please be guided by that. And then after 10 minutes, we'll bring you back into the plenary for the big group, this Q&A and plenary.